Hi, this is Dan Courtney, and I've been dealing with Christian presuppositional apologetics for just over a year now, including a debate, a rather contentious discussion, and a couple of videos identifying specific problems with the presuppositionalist argument. So in this video, I'm going to try to put what I see as the most egregious presuppositional errors all in one video. Obviously, I can't tackle each subject in depth here, but it should give you a good idea of what to look for. First, let's start with the basic description of Christian presuppositional apologetics. Now, I find what Wikipedia says about presuppositionalism quite good. They say, presuppositionalism is a school of Christian apologetics that believes the Christian faith is the only basis for rational thought. It presupposes that the Bible is divine revelation and attempts to expose flaws in other worldviews. It claims that apart from presuppositions, one cannot make sense of any human experience, and there can be no set of neutral assumptions from which to reason with a non-Christian. So, with that in mind, let's dive right in, shall we? Presuppositionalism relies on the supposed falsification of other worldviews in an attempt to leave Christianity as the only alternative. Or as the late Greg Bahnsen said, Christianity is true because of, quote, the impossibility of the contrary, unquote. And by worldview, the presuppositionalist means a network of ideas and beliefs through which the individual interprets the world. For example, the presuppositionalist worldview is, in part, that Christianity is the only basis for rational thought, as well as the Bible being revealed from God, God being a personal being, triune, omniscient, omnipotent, and so forth. So you may be thinking to yourself, well, what is my worldview? If you're an atheist like me, you may think that atheism is your worldview. But atheism, in its strictest sense, is simply a lack of belief in a deity. So atheism isn't a worldview at all. For me, I would say that I have elements of naturalism, empiricism, and perhaps some skepticism as my worldview. Obviously, there are a lot of worldviews, including many, many different religions, and even the various sects within each religion. But as Mr. Brian Boss points out, Dr. Bahnsen merely asserts this position and does not actually establish it. The first blunder made by presuppositionalists is to simply lump all non-Christian worldviews together. Again, as Dr. Greg Bahnsen claims, all non-Christian worldviews, quote, presuppose human autonomy, unquote, and therefore he feels justified in pitching them all in together in the same basket. There's a good reason for the presuppositionalist to try and put all non-Christian worldviews in one basket, because by defeating this supposed monolithic non-Christian worldview, he would indeed be achieving his goal of establishing Christianity by the impossibility of the contrary. But the Christian-non-Christian worldview dichotomy is clearly a faulty one, and the problem for the presuppositionalist is exposed quite effectively by Brian Boss in his 2005 paper, Van Tillian Presuppositional Apologetics, A Critique Concerning Certainty. In this paper, which I've linked to in the notes, regarding the presuppositional argument put forth by Dr. Greg Bahnsen, Boss states, quote, there is an inductive element crucial to the method, and as such it does not provide objective certainty, unquote. In short, what Boss does is show that in fact the Christian-non-Christian worldview dichotomy is a false one, and that therefore the presuppositionalists, at best, would only be able to defeat a sampling of possible non-Christian worldviews. Further, there are worldviews that have yet to emerge, so the presuppositionalists cannot have defeated them even in principle. This leaves the presuppositionalists in the position of making an inductive argument. That is, the best they can do is say that they have defeated some worldviews, but their claimed ability to defeat all worldviews is merely an empty assertion. The second problem has to do with the presuppositionalists' attempt to create uncertainty in other worldviews. A common question posed by the presuppositional apologist Cy ten Bruggencate is, could you be wrong about everything that you claim to know, unquote? If the answer is yes, then his conclusion is, quote, then you don't know anything, unquote. Or to sum up the argument in one sentence, quote, if you could be wrong about everything you claim to know, then you don't know anything, unquote. If the fallaciousness of this argument isn't immediately apparent, Then let's try an analogy. Let's say that one person stood at a table with a pair of dice, and another person stood at a distance away where he or she could see the dice but not clearly make out the number displayed. Every time the person rolled the die, the other person would squint and call out the number. On any particular roll, the person making the call freely admits that they could be wrong. After all, the dots are fuzzy at a distance. In fact, the person admits that they could be wrong about every die roll, no matter how many times they were rolled. But it does not follow that the person is in fact wrong about any particular roll. The person could have said the roll was 7, when in fact it was 7. Using the presuppositionalist definition of knowledge, justified true belief, the person calling the die rolls would then have knowledge of at least one roll of the dice. It is justified by the person's view of the die, albeit fuzzy. He or she would believe that it was true, and it is in fact true. Therefore, the conclusion of the presuppositionalist argument that this person doesn't know anything is clearly false. This is also called denying the antecedent and is one of the formal logical fallacies. In this case, the antecedent is implied by the modifier could, such that you could be wrong or you could be right about what you claim to know. The conclusion then, you don't know anything, denies that you could be right. Another common presuppositional tactic is to question the uniformity of nature. Ironically, the presuppositionalist will point to the fact that we make inductive inferences about the future to try to undermine the certainty of the non-Christian. As the presuppositionalist Stephen Feinstein has said, quote, all science rests on the precondition of the uniformity of nature. Inductive inference takes something that we've experienced in the past and then projects it into the future, unquote. Presuppositionalists will make the argument, rightly so, that the laws that describe the behavior of mass and energy must remain consistent over time and across the universe. The argument is that without this behavior, called the uniformity of nature, we could draw no conclusions from experiments because repeating the test would not necessarily provide the same results. This is indeed true. The uniformity of nature is axiomatic to all science and is required to make any inductive inference, even as mundane an inference as expecting that gravity will continue to work in the same direction tomorrow as it does today. On this point, the presuppositionalists and the atheists can agree. But in order to create a need for God, the presuppositionalist goes one step further. He will insist that the presumption of uniformity must be justified, and he posits God as the justification for that uniformity. As Dr. Greg Bahnsen has said, quote, God created the world, and this world reflects the uniformity that he imposes on it by his governing, and our thinking is to reflect the same consistency or logical coherence that is in God's thinking, unquote. By asserting that God is required to impose uniformity on nature, the presuppositionalist goes beyond simply describing the way the universe is. The presuppositionalist argument is that, left to its own, the universe would be non-uniform. God is then, according to the presuppositionalist, required to impose uniformity on an otherwise inherently non-uniform universe. According to the Christian view, God is inherently orderly and operates in a uniform manner. The presuppositionalist makes this claim while he denies uniformity as an inherent characteristic of nature. This is a type of special pleading wherein the presuppositionalist will insist that everything requires the imposition of uniformity except the one thing that he wishes to exempt from this requirement. Or as the presuppositional critic Dawson Bethrick put it, quote, to suppose that the uniformity of nature is an effect of some prior cause would commit the fallacy of the stolen concept, for it would need to presume the uniformity of the nature of the agent allegedly responsible for causing uniformity in nature, unquote. Presuppositionalism also attempts to attack our notions of truth.
But what about truth? What is truth to an evolutionist? The best that an evolutionist can hope for is believing this has helped me to survive. If all we are is evolved chemical reactions, how do you get to this is true? As Doug Wilson argued, if we're just advanced chemical reactions debating over which one of us is speaking the truth, will be on par with shaking up a bottle of Mountain Dew on this table and a bottle of Dr. Pepper on that table, opening them up and deciding which chemical reaction is producing true fizz and which chemical reaction is producing false fizz. Chemical reactions do not produce truth.
This fizzing analogy is an oft-repeated refrain from presuppositionalists that commits the fallacy of composition. This fallacy attempts to assign attributes of the individual components to the whole, and in so doing neglects the character of the entity in its totality. But the presuppositionalist actually commits a second fallacy with this fizzing analogy. He's committing the reification fallacy. This fallacy treats in concrete terms that which is abstract. Simply put, truth is not tied to or part of some physical process, but truth is a judgment we make about a proposition's correspondence with reality. But even this widely accepted concept of truth is challenged by presuppositionalists. They define truth as that which corresponds to the mind of God. But since neither God or the disembodied mind thereof is a coherent concept, presuppositionalists end up putting meaningless terms between themselves and the reality to which they ultimately wish to anchor truth. The presuppositionalists will also point to their holy scriptures as products of God's mind and conclude that they are, by definition, true. The presuppositionalist has thus disconnected truth from reality by inserting their arbitrary God. It doesn't matter to the presuppositionalist that many aspects of the scriptures are in direct conflict with evidence, because any objective measure of the evidence is not relevant to their definition of truth. This disconnection of truth from evidence is perhaps the most distinguishable characteristic of presuppositionalism, and is seen by the presuppositional community as one of their strengths. After all, no evidence, no matter how compelling, could be used to refute their position. But it was the philosopher Karl Popper who wrote, quote, "Insofar as a scientific statement speaks about reality, it must be falsifiable, and insofar as it is not falsifiable, it does not speak about reality." Unquote. Presuppositionalists will also go to great lengths to delineate their Christian God from other notions of God. For example, love is used as a means to bring the Trinity into the equation. Quote, "Adam and Eve, that love was grounded, or could be accounted for, based on the very being of God himself." Unquote. Here, the presuppositionalist Dustin Segers is claiming that a Trinitarian God has always, quote, "existed in eternal fellowship and relationship with himself," unquote, thus grounding the concept of love. This is a simple reification fallacy, where Dustin is treating love in physical terms, when it is only conceptual. Love is a label we give to a range of emotions. It is not, as Dustin would have us believe, constrained by the physical world or in need of a standard. Dustin is treating the concept of love like he does the concept of a meter. A meter is a specific distance, and in order to normalize distance measurements, we have voluntarily adopted a standard of a meter. In that respect, a meter is, quote, "grounded," unquote, in the standard. But how many loves would it take to stretch around the globe? Or how much love would fit in the trunk of my car? These are nonsensical questions because love is simply an abstraction. If a Trinitarian God did exist, and if he did somehow love himself, then it would add nothing to our experience of love or our use of the term. This brings us to morality. The Christian, or should I say the fundamentalist Christian, view of morality is perhaps the most dangerous and the most concerning. And here the presuppositionalist is squarely in the fundamentalist camp. Quote, "Apart from biblical creation, morality has no justification," unquote. This is a quote from Dr. Georgia Purdom and Dr. Jason Lyle, also presuppositionalists. The presuppositionalists will claim that we are clearly moral beings, therefore the Christian God must exist. The major problem with this reasoning is that it rests on a tautology, a rhetorical device that in essence says the same thing twice. In this case, God is equated with good in a moral sense, such that whatever God commands is by definition good. But this provides no more information than to say God is God or good is good. It utterly fails to explain why a godly command is good. This also does nothing to connect the concept of good to human well-being. By divorcing morality from human well-being, the Christian fundamentalist and his presuppositionalist frontman not only advocate for a system that is demonstrably irrational, but for a system virtually guaranteed to increase human suffering. If the simple fact that presuppositionalist arguments are patently fallacious is not enough reason to oppose them, then their view of morality certainly is. So, as we've seen, it starts with the false dichotomy of treating all non-Christian worldviews as a single worldview. Then the presuppositionalist contradicts himself by claiming certainty of his position with an inductive argument, which is inherently uncertain. The presuppositionalist's attack on the non-Christian's foundation of knowledge commits the logical fallacy of denying the antecedent. Even the presuppositionalists' attempt to make their God necessary for science, with the claim that uniformity needs to be imposed on nature, commits the fallacy of special pleading. Presuppositionalist assaults on truth commit three more fallacies just on this one topic: the fallacy of composition, and the reification fallacy with the fizzing analogy, and the equivocation fallacy by trying to equate truth to God's mind. In an attempt to rationalize the Trinitarian God, the reification fallacy is employed again to try to, quote, ground, unquote, love. The equating of God with good, a common Christian claim, is a tautology and a dangerous attempt to separate our actions from our well-being. So there you have it, a summary of the most obvious errors committed by the presuppositionalists. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, and as always, your comments are appreciated.